Dr. Temple Grandin holds a Ph.D. in her field of animal science. Before one can truly understand the inspiration of Temple Grandin's work, it is important to understand the events in her life that altered her path and the direction it took. This notion is a part of her teachings. The notion of understanding influences on the individual's life and bringing positives forward as a guiding force, in less vague terms, encouraging kids to pursue wider experiences and careers such as those in science. Important to know about Temple. Temple Grandin was one of few kids identified to have autism in the late 40s. At the age of 2, after showing normative development, Temple suddenly regressed in behavior and stopped speaking. These are normal occurrences for children with autism that have not been diagnosed yet. While we know how to identify children with autism, around the 40s and for many years after, autism was massively unstudied. How one came to have autism was not understood as of yet, and all information on autism was shrouded in fear and many misinformed theories. At this time in history, even being diagnosed was a difficult task, as doctors feared this for children or were unaware of autism completely. Further into Temple's upbringing, Astasia Cutler, Grandin's mother, was also pressured by the times to be the perfect mother and raise children with, quote, potential. Faced with so little information on autism but already well educated, Eustacia set to rigorously reclaim her daughter and expose her mind to more that the world had to offer, and explaining in slow detail everything they encountered, a process akin to a scientific study. However, still in a cruel time, bullying was a reality for young, now school-age Grandin. An outburst in response occurred. One of these incidents led to Grandin to be sent off to a relative, where she experienced an environment that influenced her college career. Grandin was sent to her aunt's farm, where she discovered herself a bit more and started the path to her career with animal science after finding admiration for the cattle on that farm. Thinking in the form of pictures. Often running into verbal troubles, those with autism can take on image-based thinking or visualizing. Grandin also posits that animals are visual thinkers, though this will be covered in full in the slides to come. Pondering over thinking styles is an area Grandin has contributed to. She's organized 3 dominant thinking styles: photorealistic, music and math, verbal, fact. Grandin is a photorealistic thinker. Continued. An area that allowed visual thinking and a closeness to animals, specifically cattle, was animal science. Animal science involves how animals behave, how they can be directed, as well as the basics of their biological functions. Grandin is one of few that propose animals do have cognitions, but that they are in pictures over a verbal form as we are familiar with. She posits the cattle are a prey animal and have evolved visual-triggered behaviors that develop for life preservation. After discovering this, as well as the many inhumane conditions these animals experience, Grandin set forward to design livestock processing facilities, using her degrees and theory of animal cognition. Animals and those seen as troublesome or unreasonable are often treated with force over understanding. That is understanding why a behavior is done, then working with this understanding to produce a solution. This way of seeing is how Grandin came to design over 1/3 of all livestock facilities in the U.S., and in a humane and efficient manner. What is good for animals is good for us too. Working within the behaviors and comforts of the animals means predicting variables that may act on the animal's behavior. Grandin observed previous designs of guiding lanes that had an abundance of fear-inducing visuals and required handlers to act violently to motivate movement. And then, accounting for cattle's affinity for moving in circular patterns, Grandin arrived at her design, which we will see in the next slide. In place of hitting and poking on moving cattle, Grandin found smooth-sided walls and twisting paths created a sense of security for the cattle that would encourage a forward movement of their own volition and an unarmed handler's presence. Assumptions of the worth of these animals, as seen through the purpose imposed on them, has created a worth hierarchy that determines the amount of care invested in them. Purpose-based worth may also determine if efforts are made to understand the subject's behavior or label them as difficult or a dumb animal. This applies for humans as well, which makes the matter more important. Just because the life history and the antecedent to behavior are unknown does not make a subject dumb or difficult when they engage in behaviors accepted as undesirable. Efforts like Temple to understand these components therefore extend to people and animals alike. This image is one of Grandin's first designs for guiding lanes that lead to an inoculation dip. Both low in visual stimulants and having a curved design makes the cattle feel safer as the handler encourages their movement forward just with his presence. Being a woman and having autism at the time and place Temple did a bulk of her work. The time and place being the late 40s when Temple was born to the mid-70s when she used her college-earned title to create her first implemented design at a cattle processing facility, and beyond since. No matter how progressive we as a society may feel, there is still no full escape from stigmas attached to gender and autism. Temple had a deep admiration for cattle. That is why she pursued animal science and later worked on facilities that process these animals. However, this area was and still is dominated with men, as it is seen as a dirty and masculine-based work. Autism comes with sensitivities to stimulants on the senses, which can be limiting, especially as society still expects individuals to change to fit its standards instead of creating spaces for the uniqueness and the views that develop with this different experience. Comparing cattle and animal cognition to people. This comparison by Grandin is more than it seems. It brings to attention how those in power evaluate the thoughts of those they have control over, and in turn, how they treat them. For women, those with autism, of a race not defined as in the majority, animals, and so on, there is a narrative that due to low levels of complex cognitions or limited ability, their treatment should be less than the majority receives. It is Grandin that reminds us all that behavior is not random, and a history of experiences matter, and these understandings will help them for a mutually beneficial outcome where those once deemed as less will be seen in their truth and allowed to advance. To conclude, signs for the future generations. This is the more recent work Grandin has taken on with her career as she moved into the presentations that detail her work and experience as an animal scientist, and as a scientist in general. She credits the path of her career to the direct exposure she received as a child and in her formative years from her mother, Eustace Cutler, Aunt Anne, and an unforgettable high school science teacher, Bill Carlock. It is exposure like this that she is now trying to encourage for younger generations for the scientific field of study. Exposure that goes beyond bounds of titles or limiting factors deemed by the majority of society. It is exposure to these wide groups that will change and advance science. Thank you for listening.